Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about The Disaster Artist. It's about having a dream to do something great, to make art, to make movies, and to keep going and not give up on that dream, even if that dream gets intertwined with making what many consider to be the worst film ever made, The Room. And I think in a lot of ways, this film being The Disaster Artist, not The Room, I already reviewed that, but in The Disaster Artist, it's not really the greatest made film. It's kind of like a typical biopic sort of thing. In terms of quality, I'd say it's a kind of a typical biopic type thing. In terms of quality, I'd say it's sort of closer to like an HBO TV movie or something like that. There's a difference, and there's always this talk around Oscar time. Are biopics worth it? And are they even that entertaining, or do they hold up that well? One thing to think about in terms of filmmaking is a film that I guess is easily comparable to this is Ed Wood. And the reason Ed Wood, the movie, has lived on for as long as it has is because it's remarkably well made. They knew the perspective they were going towards it. It has a lot of great funny like behind the scenes stuff, as well as The Room does, but it's kind of more focused on being a movie and less, telling these stories and telling these tales. And certainly if you're a fan of Ed Wood, and I'm sure if you saw Ed Wood when that came out and were interested in Ed Wood, you'd heard most of those stories a million times, but some of it was Tim Burton having fun doing the myth making and so forth and things like that. It was certainly Tim Burton at the height of his powers. I think it's maybe Tim Burton's best movie. But with James Franco, who directed and starred and produced this, much like what Tommy Wiseau did, maybe to totally get into character, he did all those things. I don't know. He didn't write this though, so I didn't get that much into character. Although I don't think this is the greatest made film, I don't think it lives up to some of the great biopics. It is a really fun movie. And it's a really funny movie. There's certain biopics that I get sick of, and they kind of go in one ear and come out the other, and then 2 years later you're like, oh right, they made a biopic of that. And The Disaster Artist you won't forget, because I had a remarkably great time. I usually see things Thursday night, if you hadn't figured that out. This is the only time I went to one that it felt like a concert or something. Like people were hyped when characters would show up. It was like I was seeing Star Wars or something, and Chewbacca showed up. Like people were cheering. It was fun. It made it more fun that way. But I think it also plays very much like a really great broad comedy. And I don't necessarily think you need to see The Room. I found this film really fun having seen the film and a little bit of research. I haven't read the book that this film is based on, which was written by Craig Sedestro, I believe, who is in The Room as Mark, and a film critic, Tom Bissell. I haven't gone to those lengths, but it was so interesting hearing all those stories, and it was similar to what I saw in a film like The Big Sick, where I had heard the story of Kumail and his wife, Emily, how they got together on various podcasts before, so it was kind of like seeing what they do with this information, and oftentimes I didn't think it was like that incredible. James Franco had so many big celebrities all throughout it. It almost feels like a Funny or Die video or something. I think The Room itself is deeper and stranger and more to go into than this movie. This movie I could watch once or twice. You basically get it. It's not that complex of a movie. It's just a typical kind of retelling of all the stories you've heard before. I was sort of interested in maybe either hearing the book on tape or reading the book possibly to hear more about it, because I didn't feel like I learned too much more than I did from like reading the IMDb or Wikipedia or seeing a few YouTube videos. I didn't really feel like that, and I feel like there was honestly more they could have gotten into, because it felt like that production went on so long. They focused on different things. I didn't know about the Malcolm in the Middle thing. I don't know how true that is. I did feel like maybe they could have gotten more into the lore, but it seemed like they were less interested in the lore and more interested in the characters of Greg and Tommy and Dave and James Franco's chemistry and things like that. And I think that plays better for an audience. Audiences like more character over going into the nitty-gritty existential dilemma that it felt like that set was. I think you could actually, honestly, and maybe Tommy Wiseau would love this, is make another movie about this and make it kind of like a darker sort of thing. I would have liked it to kind of play into all the weirder imagery and weirder ideas, and like how come they didn't, I don't remember them even having a scene where they brought on the frames with the spoons. What was odd is because I thought this film would be more professional and have, maybe a little more nuance than The Room, and I think The Room is more nuanced than this real Hollywood movie. It just doesn't feel as as deep in a lot of ways. It feels simplistic in terms of those HBO kind of biopic-y TV movie type things do, where you're like, okay, this was fun, I get it. But I still think it's a remarkably great time. You know, I think you'll have fun with it. It's a fun movie. I think it plays excellently well. Of any of those I've seen in like the past couple of years, I think it like holds up remarkably well in comparison to that. Now, it's a shitty genre that I don't like at all and think it's usually, you know, acting over filmmaking and things like that, and it certainly is, and maybe this is also, but it at least understands how to use that better than most of these films usually do, frankly. James Franco is really good as Tommy Wiseau, but Dave Franco really steals the show, and I thought people were maybe being contrarians about that, but I honestly do feel that way. Dave Franco does a really great performance in this. I always knew Dave Franco was a good actor, but I feel like he really is remarkably great as Greg Sestero. I think he does a good job of getting into that and getting into like how he believes in this, but also kind of knows it's stupid and shitty. And James Franco is almost like perfect to play Tommy Wiseau. I can't think of a person who would get that kind of a character more. I almost feel like him and his brother playing off of one another. It's kind of the both extremes of their sort of personas and maybe who they are, that like James Franco is more of this kind of arty, strange weirdo that no one can sort of explain, and Dave Franco is more of like the down-to-earth sort of everyman. And so I think it sort of works within who they are, which is, I think, an interesting way to do it. I like that everyone from the How Did This Get Made podcast is in this movie and has a speaking role. It has like kind of an important part in it. I think you'll remember each of them. If you haven't listened to that podcast, you should. And obviously they did do an episode with The Room, which is actually a good episode also. I listened to it recently. Clearly, I think James Franco is a fan of that podcast, so he's going to put them all in this, but they're all, you know, Room fans as well, particularly Paul Scheer. There's a lot of things this film does that usually you'd expect in worse comedies, and maybe because James Franco has been in bad comedies, he sort of knows how to use certain elements of this, particularly the opening where you have all the talking celebrity heads to kind of exemplify sort of what makes The Room so strange in a lot of ways. It's the only time you really get into that. You don't really get into it in the movie, and even them like kind of recapturing parts of The Room, which apparently I think they shot about like 30 minutes of recreations of scenes from The Room, and they have them placed side by side. But what's interesting is like I never felt like they lived up to The Room itself or even anywhere close, kind of showing you kind of the amazing cinematic mistake that movie was. It's fun, and it goes into the kind of fun of this movie. This is more of a fun biopic than anything. It's a biopic you could take people to and laugh all throughout, and those themes get definitely everyone in the audience I saw it with was in love with those, and they were fine. I did think Ari Gaynor, who was in this, did an amazing job almost recreating the Lisa part. I thought she was really good, actually. She didn't really get as much to do as maybe she should have. And you know, you have people like Josh Hutcherson and Jackie Weaver and Alison Brie and Seth Rogen and all this, and they were all good. It's a big anticipated populist movie, which is kind of cool for a film like this, and it is certainly the biggest film James Franco's ever directed, which he's directed like a bunch. If you look at his IMDb, you're like, what are all these movies? Like, there was one that came out earlier this year, apparently, I didn't even know about. But I think this just gets into the kind of fun of The Room and kind of gets you into it, but it certainly gets to that everyone, while they're working on a movie, is passionate about an idea and has this ambition, and the idea that no one sets out to make a bad movie. And certainly this simplifies certain things, that the kind of idea of The Room as this like mammoth bad movie kind of happened with one screening. Apparently it happened over a little bit because of the infamy that The Room had in LA and things like that. So it wasn't exactly the way they described it, but it is interesting to see someone, they put their heart and soul into something, they really want something to happen for them, they really want to make it as an actor and be an actor and everything like that, and to see that kind of turn in a certain way. And I guess it is also different than what happened with Ed Wood, because Ed Wood never really got the acceptance that would later happen, whereas what happened with Tommy Wiseau is he has made an industry out of The Room and is able to go around the world, as is Greg Sestero. That's sort of a different phenomenon, and it is interesting seeing someone realize their thing is shit, but they're still okay with it because they like it. It would have been interesting for them to wrestle with it more. It seems like Tommy Wiseau even now isn't absolutely in love with that, because he doesn't often like want to watch his movie, although he has to introduce screenings all the time, so I don't know if I'd want to watch it all the time either. But I don't think The Disaster Artist is is what The Room is. It's just kind of like a fun little companion piece at best, but it's really good at doing that, to be honest. I think James Franco really knows how to do a very character-based sort of fun movie, and if anything, he probably could do like a comic book movie or something, because this is similar to how Marvel does their things, where it's like character first, and that's what really this is. It's like the characters of Tommy and Greg over the kind of lore of The Room. And certainly I would have liked a film that got more into the nitty-gritty craziness of that set and what went on, and less about like Greg Sedestro's thing with his girlfriend, who eventually just sort of breaks up with him off screen or something. But I feel like I would have liked a film that went really more into it, but it played with what it had very well. James Franco seems to really know how to use him and his brother's personas, how to use his own persona, how to direct one of these films. There's directors with longer filmographies who directed more bigger movies that don't manage to make these kind of movies this well. If anything, this shows me really James Franco as a filmmaker understands the kind of parameters of the genre he's working in and how to get that to work as well as this movie does. I think it's probably one of the more fun comedies I've seen this year, even though Apatow I don't think had much to do with this and just has a cameo in it. It's under that kind of school of like, you know, pretty bad filmmaking but fun movie and enjoyable film, and I think this is probably one of the more enjoyable out of that whole like group of people I've seen in a little bit. You will have fun with this movie. It is a good time. It's just not an amazing crazy experience, you know, movie of our time or movie about movies of our time maybe, but it gets damn close. Maybe the filmmaking's not there, maybe it doesn't get into The Room lore as much as it maybe should, maybe it isn't the movie you imagined in your head, but god damn, I had a good time with it. And it helps seeing it with people who are into The Room, who were quiet through the whole thing, even though everyone wore tuxes and brought footballs and everything like that. I don't think you need to be. I think you can watch this movie and have a good time, because the jokes aren't necessarily just reliant on you having understood The Room. It probably helps, and I bet you'll want to see The Room after this. It's like a huge advertisement for that movie. I kind of want to rewatch that again before I rewatch this. So I guess it was sort of successful in that regard. But anyway, The Disaster Artist manages to make a really enjoyable, fun, populist kind of biopic in ways that most of them fail to do, and this kind of succeeds, even if it doesn't succeed in being the true kind of misbegotten and fascinating cinematic gem that The Room was. But very few films will ever get to be that, and I think The Disaster Artist is fine being what it is. So if you've seen The Disaster Artist and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to. Lisa, you're tearing me apart. Yeah.